patch in my own keys and firmware, and then run a CRC adder at the end, and then try and reverse the algorithm at the bottom. So there's basically two checksums. One's code signing, one checksum. And if you patch in your own key with your own password, it turns out that just works, and you don't have to do brute forcing. So top tip there. So this is one of my favorite vulnerabilities. Okay, Colin once asked me, "Why do you hack switches?" And I said, "Because that's where the packets are." You know, paraphrasing Dillinger, right? But also, this is important because industrial system networks have a little bit of authentication and a little bit of crypto, but for the most part, they don't, right? Most of these protocols, if you can put packets on the wire, you can tell it to do something. Occasionally, you see something like a prevent or replay, but essentially, if you understand the protocol well enough, you can just tell it to do what you want it to do, and you can even perform things like recording traffic and replaying it, right? So once you have control over the switch, you can exfiltrate traffic. Now, that will work in many environments, but on some real-time systems, let's say electrical, you have like 500 milliseconds of time in which to perform some of your attacks. So if you route your traffic halfway around the world to another country, you're going to fail to reach your timing constraint in that system. So you need to be able to alter the firmware to perform some of the process control in the style of Jason Larson or something. So then, I'm playing around with the switch, and before authentication to the actual web server, I find this DOS, right? And essentially, there's a config file before you log in that you fetch. And I created a no cache parameter, and just incremented or randomized the number and requested this particular config file 2,000 times very, very slowly. And the web server of the switch rebooted, right? It was just initial fuzzing when it first started. And I thought, oh, it's a DOS. So what? DOSes don't matter. But they do really matter in industrial systems, particularly when the web server going down causes the switch to reboot for 2 minutes and all the traffic to be dropped in that time period. So this is the current fix from GE. They had to go to Garrettcom and ask Garrettcom to fix it. And I think originally Garrettcom said, sorry, this is end of life, and now they've changed their mind, and now they're patching it. But I want you to read that very carefully. Their mitigation is basically turn off the web server. I'm not too happy about that. I think we can do better as a community. Well, you would configure it through Telnet, which, as we all know, is an awesomely secure protocol. So, why does DOS matter? Why does DDoS matter? In the ICS community, we try to be really good to each other and reference great work where we see it. You may have already seen the talk of Maria Korfel and Jason Larson. Amazing stuff. They dig really deep into the physics of damage and exploitation of industrial control systems. I stay a little bit higher up and try and focus on vulnerabilities and cost of attack. But basically, they showed in this paper that having a DOS in certain types of chemical process control is enough to give you almost complete control over the process. So go look that paper up and you'll understand why we're trying to raise DOS as a much more serious vulnerability in industrial control systems. All right, so I'll do the first one. There was an old day, essentially, SSH username enumeration, if any of you remember it. I found it when I first started looking at the OpenGear. It's worth saying, OpenGear gave me this switch, right? I met them in a conference and they were like, oh, you research switches, like, we'll give you one and you can test it and we'll get free testing and you'll get publicity and that's pretty cool, right? And I thought that was remarkable, especially in the ICS space. So they fixed it in 1 week, right? They patched this vulnerability in 1 week. Now, I grant you, it's just a pound configuration change, but still, GE took 8 months to tell us to turn off the web server. Siemens took 3 months to change some of their documentation and fix the CSRF. So 1 week, I think, particularly deserves a round of applause.
Yeah, so I spent most of my time looking at the OpenGear switch, and it's out of the few switches we looked at, it's probably the most secure default state. Everything we found essentially was post-authentication. You had to be logged on to the switch to be able to do anything. So it makes a lot of whilst the impact may be high for some of these issues, the actual likelihood and realistic sort of impact is much, much lower. And in our conversation with OpenGear, they were upfront and told us when these fixes were planned, they had scheduled them all in, get them all worked, so they really did help us out there. but we'll carry on with the issues we did find. So that is the OpenGear switch. It looks like that. It's out on the website. You can download the firmware. They also have a open development kit, so you can basically build your own firmware for these switches. So if OpenGear ever go out of business, you don't have to replace your hardware and you can keep things running over. So that's pretty cool. First issue, they have on their webpage this nice support report, which gives you all sorts of useful information. It's probably really tiny, you can learn it there. But they have a link right at the top that allows you to download the support details for essentially offline viewing. And this page is normally only accessible by the root or admin user. However, you can directly navigate to the page as any user and pull down all the information. This includes things like the Chrome tab, the init tab, the entire syslog, the support text file, and that contains the IP tables configuration, the location of all the SSH keys, which becomes useful later on, the IP tables config, the config XML file, which contains all the usernames but no passwords. So immediate user name enumerations you can pull down to get over everybody else. Next issue they have, we found, was get file. And essentially this allows you to get any of the files on the device. Useful if you don't have SSH or Telnet access, but you can still essentially pull down any of the Linux files you've got there. So you can pull down their password file, which looks slightly more sensible than the GE password file in that it has no password in it and only contains sensible users. However, you can also download their private key. Again, is the default key, you can change it, it is documented. And then we tried the traditional sort of cross-site scripting. Can we get cross-site scripting in place against this switch? No. Input validation, denied. You know, they've actually thought about this stuff. Yeah, I'm as shocked as you are. However, we decided, what about outbound validation? So they have this config XML file. You can log onto the device and you can change the config XML file and basically just input your own XML. That looks like HTML. And it executes. Oops. But again, you know, cross-site scripting on these devices, but you have to already have sort of permission to do this sort of thing. So yes, it's nice and quirky, but realistically, it's not the most brilliant of attacks. However, this leads us to the last attack, which is essentially cross-site request forgery. So this is a burp suite dump of the sort of creating a new user. And so this is all bits, it's got all the parameters, it's a post request. So we've mocked up a small web page that contains just that code that gives us essentially all these users. We've deliberately asked ourselves to give ourselves admin user, and if you can have somebody logged into the device and get them to navigate to a people web page, you too can create your own device, create your own login, backdoor onto the account. And we can probably demo that if the demo goes good to us.
Can you make that look easy?
I make that look easy.
We'll find out. So at this point in the presentation, you're probably wondering what the hell this guy's on stage for. So why don't we give him a little chance to explain that while Colin sets up the camera.
Thanks. So mostly I stand for the good-looking guys, and it's good for image, right? But what I really like focusing on is the defensive aspect of it. So these two found a bunch of vulnerabilities, actually 11, right? 5 different switch families. And at that point, if you're an industrial control system person, you're probably kind of depressed. So I'm the kumbaya, the fence is doable kind of person to talk about how attackers can take advantage of these things, but more importantly, how defenders can look for those things. So the unique thing about industrial control system networks, are you ready for the demo? Alright, demos are more important, so read that first.
Right. So this is essentially the login page. We can, well, it's not the login page, but this is the user groups page. You can see down at the bottom we've got a root, a testing, and an admin user. The root is the default one, the testing and admin I've just created. So our test script will look shockingly like that, which is exactly what we had in the first place. So we're logged in, and in another tab, we can navigate to our evil page. Our evil page does so. Thanks for wondering. Something else? And we can go back to our user group, and there's a new user! Yay! And it's happening! No, it was frighteningly so.